changes in an organism, not copying an organism, but actually changing it. So we're changing all of the codon, all examples of 1 out of the 64 codons. We published that and various papers that have come from that. And then we're getting close to finishing 7 out of 64 codons genome-wide. So this is truly radical redesign, and you have to do it very carefully, because the more you change the genome, the more likely you're going to break it. So if you just make a whole new genome from first principles, it almost certainly will be broken for 100 different reasons, and it'll be hard to hunt them down. So we do a combinatorial exploration that we'll see in a moment. But first you want to ask why. Why do this? Why change the genome radically? And we have 4 pretty good reasons here, I think, which is we greatly improved the ability to use non-standard amino acids. These date way back, but we've now made them very efficient to be used and use multiple ones per protein. And then we have this genetic and metabolic isolation, which we think are useful because of item number 4, which is this multivirus resistance. In principle, we can make a version of E. coli or possibly any organism which is a priori resistant to all viruses, even viruses you haven't studied yet. And the reason is that viruses expect a certain genetic code, and they don't have that much else in common, but they do have that in common. And so if you can change the genetic code adequately, then you become multivirus resistant. Now, multivirus resistant synthetic organism is one of the few laboratory artifacts that could survive in the wild. I mean, it could not only survive, it could thrive. Most things that you make in the lab, if you put it in the wild, is going to disappear very quickly. But this is an exception, and that's why we spent some time on genetic and metabolic isolation, as represented in these Science and Nature papers. Now, this is work from our collaborator, Pete Schultz, and over many years developing all these non-standard amino acids. I circled the one which has 2 phenol groups in it called PIP-A. That PIP-A we used as arbitrarily chosen as one that's fairly bulky and allowed us to make this genetically and metabolically isolated strain. This is, we didn't expect that first codon on the 64, since the stop codon is kind of a lengthy, rare codon. We didn't expect it to have a big impact on phages, but in fact, it reduced the infectivity by 3 orders of magnitude for both lambda and T7, the 2 phages we studied in detail. So it's really pretty impactful on all the phases we've looked at so far. The 7 changes, we're making 7 codons out of 64. We expect to be completely intact. As I said, there will be no viral growth and no way of escape. That's our bold prediction. Now, this is how we de-risk it combinatorially. Like I said, if we just made the genome and hope for the best, it probably wouldn't work. So we have to make thousands of genomes, and along the way we learn all of the problems. In fact, for other experiments, not this one, we've made billions of genomes combinatorially for optimizing metabolism. But this story here is about making a specific set of codon changes. So the 1 codon genome-wide actually had very few real problems other than working out the technology. But when we did the 2 codons for arginine, these are rare arginine codons, AGA and AGG, then we found about 12 cases where there were problems. And we expected this to be the most problematic of the codons because they look a little bit like cyclophenols lysosome binding sites. And so either removing them or creating them is problematic. And then we went on to do 13 codons genome-wide in 42 essential genes and found lots and lots of, every place where there's a gray bar is where we had trouble doing that aggressive recoding. Actually, we recoded every codon we could recode, so it was more like 32 codons, but 13 were completely eliminated. Now, so once we had that 1 codon genome-wide, we wanted to not only make it be able to use a new amino acid, but to become completely dependent on that amino acid, the way it is for the 20 that already exist. So it would be very hard exercise to make E. coli or any other organism, so that it didn't require, say, tryptophan or tyrosine or any of the amino acids. So we wanted to make this amino acid PIP-A in that category. And so we went through about half dozen essential genes. Actually, we went through all the essential genes for which we had crystal structures, which is about 128. And then looked at every amino acid in each of those crystal structures for something where we could substitute in PIP-A, making accommodating choices all around it. So this is a big combinatorial problem. It was all done using computational tools like Rosetta. Dan Mendel was in charge of the computational and structural biology, and Mark LaJoie was involved in the genome engineering. Barry Stoddard and Rayo were helped with the crystallography. Now, this is crystallography of one of the half dozen essential genes we engineered. And you can see this leucine residue we're going to change into PIP-A. So there it is, change to PIP-A. You can see the 2 phenol groups, and this is the crystal structure. Electron density is the cage, and it's a good, it's a high-quality structure that shows that PIP-A is as we modeled it to be. But more importantly, we did it in a number of different genes here shown along the bottom. And we wanted to look at escape rate, because each of these, to be truly dependent upon the amino acid, there can be no escape in any reasonable population. And this is still a work in progress, but we showed that once we get to three essential genes simultaneously, we could not scale up to a big enough experiment where we could detect any escapes. This is about less than 1 per trillion, essentially 0 detected per trillion so far. But we're working on new protocols where we might be able to detect escape But both our group and Fahrenheit's group at Yale have shown that this 1 in a trillion is the current escape rate. And the NIH guidelines talk about 10 to the minus 8, not 10 to the minus 12. But in fact, I don't think anyone's ever achieved 10 to the minus 8 before, so we now have something that's very convincing. These in blue are the 7 codons we're currently changing genome-wide. So the first one we changed is this one is UAG, which is the Amber stock codon, and then we're changing the leucine, a serine, and arginine pair of codons because transfer RNAs typically recognize pairs. And then we can, only after we change the genome-wide, can we delete the transfer RNA or the release factor that otherwise would be essential. So we've now synthesized the entire 4 megabase pairs and have assembled huge parts of it into 50 kD and replaced parts of the genome with 50 kD. And we're discovering things along the way, just like with the AG and AGA codons that we have to fix case by case. But it's not too bad, it's going pretty quickly. And that's E. coli. And we hope that we can make other organisms virus resistant. I'd like to be virus resistant myself. I don't know. But to do that, we need a new mechanism because the methods we use for this, which I didn't go through because they're not general, the methods we use for this is a lambda red system. And so far, it works in one organism, E. coli K12. It doesn't even work in E. coli D. And so anytime you just, and all these methods ultimately come from microorganisms, all the recombinases and the nucleases and so forth come from microorganisms. And it's hard to predict in advance whether it's going to just work in one strain of one species or whether it's going to work in every organism. This is an example of something that came from E. coli called CRISPR. Probably doesn't need any introduction. I'm not going to ask. But it looked kind of like junk DNA in 1987. And now what happened is this did work in basically every organism that you can get DNA into for RNA. So starting with human was oddly enough the first non-bacterial organism, and then boom, from January 2013, within a few months it was in all these other organisms. And so this is, you all know how it works, but basically you've got a collaboration between protein and RNA using simple Watson-Crick base pairs, over 20 base pairs, plus a little PAM, 5 other proteins, 2 Gs, and you get this triplex, and you get either double strand break, or you can make it a single strand nick, or you can make it no nicks at all. We call that Cas9 or dead Cas9, and that can be used for activation and repression. And so I think this merits a quote from Jacques Monod in the year I was born. Anything found to be true of E. coli must also be true of elephants. As it turns out, elephants did not have CRISPR. So I had to add this little note. If not, we can make it so. Because we have now made it work in elephants and Anopheles mosquitoes. More about that in a moment. But more importantly than getting it in all these organisms was getting it to be more specific. And there's quite a few breakthroughs in many labs on making it more specific. It seems like people obsess about this efficacy of CRISPR much more than any other. I think that's a good casualty of having something everybody likes that hasn't play out something. So as it happened, we were planning to I think the main way of thinking about American basis, we're going to fire 2 CRISPR binding sites in 20 versions near one another, either fix this or variable, slightly variable. You can add RNAs to find work and most importantly, we have better durable surfaces that take it up and you put us on the ones that are utilize that. Very few of them actually utilize that high frequency. So we're working on cakes in my lab, among others, and it's humanized for testing therapies, or they could use for xenotransplantation, or in agricultural situations to lower the infection and hence transmission of viruses from pigs to humans. So at the top, these are some of the genes that we've been working on. At the top are the ones involved in major immune antigens, including carbohydrates, the blood clotting and complement system. And one of the big showstoppers in the early days of this was Novartis spent about $1 billion making humanized pigs for xenotransplantation. And they kind of started phasing it out when they realized that there were dozens of endogenous retroviruses. Almost all herbivores have these endogenous retroviruses, and they didn't even know how many there were. They had a beautiful timeline for all the rest of the project for insert another $1 billion and they'd have it, but they had no timeline for counting or deleting these endogenous retroviruses. We've now counted them, and there's 62 that are plausibly have active components. And we have now, with CRISPR, simultaneously removed all 62 for less than $1 billion. We actually spent 14 days on it. And then we're also interested in a number of other, those are endogenous viruses, and here are several exogenous viruses, for instance, swine flu. And what's at stake are hundreds of thousands of people that are on waiting lists for transplants. So we tend to underestimate that because there are many people who are just not even put on the waiting list because they're too old or for some other reason, because it's all rational. Now, this is a map of the malaria belt, and the malaria belt has consequences for human genetics, which I'm not going to talk about right now, but I will tomorrow, where you'll actually get an enrichment for alleles in D6PD, hemoglobin S, and thalassemia. There are over 2 billion people, 2.8 billion people that are impacted by these alleles, which is deleterious in their own right, but they do protect them from malaria. So the alternative to messing with the human genome is messing with malaria. Or the vector that carries it. So we proposed a couple of strange articles where we were focused on not just proposing technology, but proposing technology that would provide safety features during the development phase in the lab, and then additional safety features when released into the wild, because this is pretty aggressive technology in terms of release into the wild. We published this in Science and eLife. eLife has more of the technical detail that's why it's featured here on the slide. And this was collaborative effort between Kevin Esfelt, a fellow in my lab, Andy Snidler, who's a joint graduate student between my lab and Romania Caparuccia's lab at Harvard School of Public Health. And this idea of gene drives goes back to, I worked with Bernard Dujon during my thesis, and he noticed it in yeast, and Austin Burt proposed it, so that was back in the 70s. Austin Burt proposed it in 2003 for use in eliminating mosquitoes, but you can see it can be used for essentially any sexually reproducing species that reproduces fast enough, not just disease vectors, but invasive species and various pests. So for example, rodents are endangering any species on about 700 islands. 100 of these islands have been made rodent-free by toxic chemicals, but that strategy doesn't scale well to the other 700 islands because of if it's a large island or if you have other animals on it you don't want to die. So this is how CRISPR works in the gene drive. We target typically an essential gene, and not just with one CRISPR, but with 6 or so different CRISPR guide RNAs, which each have the same Cas9 protein, and then they make these cuts. And now you've got this, you shredded that essential gene, and the only way that it will survive, whether this is a somatic cell or a meat, will survive is by replacing that essential gene with this whole cassette, which includes the guide RNAs, the Cas9, and other markers, and in this case a package, which in this case is an anti-malaria transgene, but it could be anything. So there's a variety of proteins that are known to be toxic to malaria they're kind of selectively neutral to the mosquito, but they're very advantageous if you can convince the mosquito to take them up. Now, so then now this makes it work again, and you turn the heterozygous into homozygote. Now we tested this. I'll tell you in a moment all the various safety methods, but here's an example one where we tested it in yeast, and we're using yeast tetrad. For those of you who are familiar with it, you expect the yeast tetrad, the ad gene here, this red light adenine metabolism to segregate 2 to 2. Which is normal Mendelian behavior, and it's not really stochastic. It's a strict 2 to 2 segregation. But when we put the gene drive in there, where the only way that the other allele can survive the cutting is by duplicating the gene drive. And this is not a typical transposon. Transposon would hop all over the genome and make a big mess. This only goes in one place in the genome. It's predetermined, and you can make it very attractive, that is to say, by targeting an essential gene. But anyway, through many of these, it's very, very close to 100%. Rather than 50% you expect of Mendel. So, and it's not just true for a lab strain. We took a wide variety of strains on this phylogenetic tree of wild yeast strains, and they all gave 99+%. So we tested the gene drive, we tested variations on it, safety variations where, for example, we would separate the Cas9 from the CRISPR, so rather putting the guide RNA from the protein, so only the guide RNA is transmitted in the gene drive, and that's a safety feature, so that way if it ever gets out, the guide RNA and the Cas9 are not on the same cassette. So in the wild, you won't have Cas9 around, you won't have the guide RNA, and it won't spread in the wild. So we proposed in this eLife paper, and now proven a variety of these things. In the lab, physical, ecological, and biological isolation, I think I just showed you, keeping the Cas9 separate from the guide RNAs is a biological or genetic isolation. There are other things that you can do to keep it under control genetically, but the ecological one is a really great one. Physical one is obvious. You do it in a containment facility, but ecological is if you do an experiment on, say, a flying insect that has a broad range, like Drosophila, if it escapes from your lab, it essentially your gene drive can go throughout the world. And this is not necessarily an existential risk, but it does look a little sloppy to have your fingerprints all over every fly in the world. But if you do something like Anopheles gambiae, which is what we're working on at the Harvard School of Public Health, there are no Anopheles gambiae outside of the Harvard School of Public Health. So that's the example of ecological isolation. If you're interested in really drilling down on the CRISPR most of the software in the world is focused on specificity, and I told you all the things that you do to improve specificity, but most of the software assumes there's a simple CRISPR cutting at one side rather than pairs of CRISPR, and they also don't focus so much on efficiency. So one way of achieving specificity is by you can either attack computationally off target, or you can look at the efficiency of the off target. So anyway, take a look at these two websites for some of the software. And then the GA is not just about specificity and efficiency design, but also analysis of the CRISPR once you have it. Now, most experiments we do on one of our favorite model organisms, is Homo sapiens, and in this we had it's a special set of presenting issues, which I'll talk much more about tomorrow. But suffice it to say, we have the world's only open access cohort, which is agreed to do all kinds of things, get recontacted, have all their data, medical and genomic, available to everyone, not just people that we have deemed suitable. So it's like Wikipedia. It's really very close to Wikipedia in many ways. And the stem cells for them, which have been differentiated into almost every kind of cell through homos here at neuronal rosettes. And also we have focused efforts on making hippocampal and other organoids. Now, so we can use these. Our favorite is PGP1, which happens to be my stem cells from my arm. And that's just because you don't want to do experiments on your students, because that's considered coercive by the agencies that decide on the ethics. But it's okay for them to do experiments on me. So that's what we do. And anyway, here's an example where we use this is the dead Cas9. This has no cutting activity, but we've tacked onto the C-terminus a EP64 activation domain, and we can use this to program anything. We happen to pick here part of a hybrid with David Sinclair's lab on aging reversal, and one of the many different pathways for aging reversal is this TFAM, which is involved in regulation of mitochondrial homeostasis, and in particular nicotinamide levels. And you can see that here over normal mouse aging, from a young 6-month-old mouse to an old 22-month mouse, that the nicotinamide goes down by factor 2. So we want TFAM to go up probably by factor 2 depending on linearity. So back in the old days, before we had the awesome software I showed you in the previous slide, the old days being 4 or 5 months ago, which is a long time in CRISPR years, we didn't really know how to predict sites very well. So we would, and this is still not a bad strategy, we just hit every site we could hit in the promoter of this TFAM, regulates the transcription factor. So you're regulating the regulator, and you're creating these, in this case, 4 different citrate proteomes. These are not naturally occurring citrate proteomes. You've made them into citrate proteomes because they bind the 20-nucleotide guide RNA. This transcription starts out on the far right here. And it turns out that only one of these is decent. All the rest are pretty pathetic, less than 1-fold improvement. So this one is a 47-fold improvement in the expression of the TFAM, and about a 9-fold improvement in the NAD, which was more than the 2-fold that we needed. But we can pat ourselves on the back about this. But the fact is that for many experiments, 47-fold activation is not enough. For example, a lot of the epigenetic reprogramming of stem cells into organoids that we're doing, 47-fold is definitely not enough. And I think we have an example of that. This is Bobby Dadwar, who's a postdoc in the lab who did this TFAM and various other aging reversal. So that EP64 domain was not enough to get high activation for any of the genes that we did. So we